All right, hello, 7th and 8th graders. Welcome to the Scientific Method Experimenting and Analyzing Data notes. So we've talked about the general points of the scientific method, what it means to conduct an experiment, and this lecture goes into more depth on what that all entails. So what do you have to do to actually conduct an experiment? I'll let Mrs. Froman take over right there.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is observations and inferences. What's the difference between those two? So an observation is literally something that you can see, something you can hear, touch, smell, or taste. It's using your senses, gathering information from your surroundings using your senses. It's not guessing what that means. It's just literally saying,
Pretty
I
black
smell
and white.
cookies or something.
Yes.
Yeah, so with that picture down there, I can see a person, they're walking their dog, the person's holding an umbrella. That's literally what I see. So that's an observation.
I could say I see tire
I
tracks.
see tire tracks. There's snow. It's snowing.
There's no leaves on the trees.
Yeah. So those would all be observations.
So an inference is when you explain or interpret your observations. So you're explaining what you saw. So what we can infer, we're trying to explain what's happening, is that it's cold out. We see snow, no leaves in the trees. Think about around here in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can infer that the car broke down. We see the car tracks,
Tire tracks.
tire tracks, and now they're walking and trying to find help.
Mm-hmm.
And I can infer that, trying to explain what I've seen.
Yeah, and that may not be what happened.
Maybe not, but based on
That's
the information
based on
we
what
have.
you see, you make that inference. Yes. Then we have controlling variables versus the control. So controlling a variable is when the scientist controls many parts of the experiment, so each part of the experiment gets the same treatment. So we're just talking about all the different parts of the experiment get the same thing. So if we're growing plants, like in that picture, all of the plants are in the same size pot, they get the same amount of water, same amount of light, they're kept at the same temperature, so those are all variables that are being controlled.
So
they all
things
get
that
the
could
same.
affect the experiment, we'll make sure we control
Yeah.
those.
So if we took one of those plants and kept it in a closet, that wouldn't be controlling that variable because it wouldn't be getting as much light as the other ones.
And we know that sunlight affects
And
the outcome.
so that would change our results of the experiment.
So now the control is not part of the experiment, and it does not get changed. So it's kind of what we control or keep the same.
Right.
That's why it's called the control. It's used to compare to the results, or compare the results to. So in this case, we have our plain soil. If we want to test for how different soil types, you can see there's some compost, more compost, even more,
50%.
and then all compost. So this experiment probably is dealing with how compost in soil, how it affects the plant growth. Or if we have normal soil, we had to see how a plant would normally grow and compare it to what things that we
when
changed.
you add things to
We
it.
add things to it. So we're using to compare to the original.
Then we have displaying data. Once you do your experiment, you have to have some way to collect and display your data.
Oh.
So you can do that in the form of a graph, like a line graph or a bar graph. You can do it in like a chart. So it's just a way to visualize your results, to kind of get it all organized and see what's happening in your experiment.
Organized, make it easy to see, try to make it look
Yes.
pretty.
Yeah.
So when we're analyzing data, what we're doing is looking at those numbers. What does it all mean? So once all the data is collected, look at the results to see the outcome of the experiment and compare that to the control outcome. So is there a difference? Is everything the same? Are there differences there we can kind of look at? And that next step, maybe drawing some conclusions. So just kind of a couple of highlights there, thinking about analyzing data and what that means. This is probably the toughest part when we're first doing experiments to understand
Yeah.
what do you mean by analyzing data. So trying to make sense. What are the numbers actually, what are they telling us? What are the numbers telling us?
Then we have to take that data and make and draw conclusions. So you make inferences and conclusions using that data. So here's where the inferences come in again. You take, analyzing the data as you're taking those literal numbers, looking at what they mean, and then you make inferences on what that data is. So you have to find out if that's going to confirm or disprove your hypothesis that you made at the beginning of the experiment.
And it's okay if your hypothesis is disproven.
Yeah,
Everyone kind of
it
freaks
happens
out.
all
Yep.
the time. Yeah, that's the whole part of experimenting.
So last thing, and probably this is a huge one in any kind of experiment, developing an experiment, is identifying errors. So I love the picture of Beaker there with the freaking out. In every experiment, things can be overlooked. When making a conclusion, you must consider all of the possible errors that have occurred during the experiment and how they may have affected the results. So those tiny things that we didn't control, because that have affected how the plant grows. Maybe one side of the room had more of a breeze than the other side, because that have affected it. So
Yeah,
all
different
those tiny things.
temperatures.
Maybe this bone was by the heater and one wasn't. So yeah, all those things. How could it affect, or could it affect the results of your experiment? That's where we identify looking for errors, and a nice beaker picture there. All right, so 7th grade, we're going to stop there with our analyzing data lecture today, and we will see you guys along the way.
All right, bye.